SMS Koh.
Mr. Speaker, our hawker centres are an integral part of Singaporeans' daily lives and our national identity. They are vibrant melting pots of diverse and affordable local food that tell stories of Singapore, how different cultures interweave into a unique heritage of who we are as a people. They are community dining rooms where Singaporeans from all walks of life gather, socialize, interact over good food in an informal setting. Hawker centres are special and quite different from food courts and restaurants. Our hawker centres are special because of the hawkers that make them come to life. They are our community kitchens, where hawkers thrive as masters of their craft to serve comfort food beloved by Singaporeans and famous worldwide. These hawkers often specialize in specific heritage dishes, such as Hainanese chicken rice, Nyonya Laksa, nasi lemak, or roti prata. I know this is a time of the day where everyone gets hungry, but I can't just help mention some of these delicacies in our hawker centres. Our hawkers, they work long hours, often more than 14 hours a day, especially on weekends and public holidays, to serve us our comfort food. Many have dedicated their lives to perfecting specific dishes, often passing down skills, special recipes, and cultural traditions from one generation to the next. Each dish is unique to a particular hawker stall because it is infused with the special recipe and the master touch of the hawker. The flavor of char kway teow from Hong Lim Park Hawker Centre is different from the one at Zion Riverside Food Centre. And I like both of them. And yes, doctors do eat char kway teow as well. But I must say, please do it in moderation. Now, these two char kway teow, they are my favorites. And I'm sure they each have their own hardcore supporters. Like many of you, I go to different hawker centers to savor the authentic differences in flavor, even of the same dish. Each hawker center has its own character and a different mix of food choices. This is why we all have our own favorite choice of favorite hawker dishes, even our own choice of favorite hawker centers. And we often debate endlessly on which hawker center has the best chicken rice or where we can find the best nasi lemak. Now, while some hawkers have done well and opened stores in other hawker centers, and some have even ventured out into the restaurant space, as noted by Mr. Keith Chua, the vast majority of stores at our hawker centers are generally run by stallholders themselves, preparing each dish meticulously with their unique touches as it is ordered, and retaining its individuality, unlike a franchise. So I think we can all agree that if a hawker center becomes replaced by franchises, the texture and the nature of a hawker center as we know it today will be quite different. Hawker centers are such a unique and central part of our national identity that in December 2020, hawker culture in Singapore was inscribed onto the UNESCO representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. I think Singaporeans and members of this House across both sides of the aisle will agree with me that this unique Singaporean institution must be nurtured, supported, and protected to ensure that our hawker centers and hawkers can thrive for generations to come. Some of our hawker heroes are gathered at the gallery today. Even at this time, some of them have stoically stayed on. I would like to acknowledge their presence and thank them for coming down today, even as we discuss these very important issues late into the evening. Thank you very much. To keep this unique character of our hawker centers, our hawker policy will need to reflect three fundamental objectives and principles. First, to ensure that hawker centers remain our community dining room, providing Singaporeans with affordable food options. Second, to ensure hawkers have a decent livelihood, and so ensure that there is long-term sustainability of the hawker trade. And thirdly, to preserve our unique local culture, local hawker culture, and the identity that is unique here. These principles apply regardless of how we run our hawker centers, whether they are managed by NEA or by operators under our newer socially conscious enterprise hawker center or SEHC model. I will address the different operating models later in my speech. I listened to Mr. Leong Man Wai's speech and that of many other members today. And I think no one will agree with these three objectives I spelled out earlier. Each of them are important. But in trying to achieve all three objectives at the same time, we must recognize that there are inherent tensions that sometimes pull in opposite directions. For instance, addressing consumers' desire for lower food prices can inevitably run counter to our wish to support our hawkers in making a decent living. Without a decent income, it will be difficult to attract young Singaporeans who have many other career options to enter this trade. Similarly, allowing more foreigners to work in our hawker centers may alleviate cost and manpower concerns for our hawkers, but it could dilute our local hawker culture and identity and change the feel and nature of our hawker centers. As such, there is a need to strike a balance between the interests of all parties. Singaporeans face cost of living pressures on many fronts, especially in recent years, due to global inflation. Global food prices have been volatile in recent years due to supply chain disruptions resulting from climate change and geopolitical events. Several members have said so as well. We feel this impact keenly because Singapore imports over 90% of our food. Singaporeans are understandably concerned about how much they pay for food at our hawker centers. Hawkers, like all of us, also feel these pressures as the cost of ingredients form a large part of their operating costs, as you have heard from some of the speakers earlier as well. In pricing their food, many hawkers struggle between keeping food affordable for their loyal customers while trying to raise prices to cover the increases in ingredient and manpower costs. This is a struggle that many of us in the House, I believe, can empathize with. I know that a good number of hawkers have kept their food prices unchanged over the years. One of our hawkers, he's here with us today, Mr. Melvin Chew, who runs Jingji Teochew Braised Duck and Kway Chap at Chinatown Complex Market and Food Center, shared with me recently that he had maintained his food prices for over 20 years, since the year 2000, to offer $3 meals to his customers. While he had previously considered raising prices, I understand he decided to maintain his $3 meals to benefit the older folks staying in the area. It was only after the pandemic that he raised prices to $4 to cope with the rising business costs. Another example is Mr. Michael, son of Omir Ali. Michael sells wonton noodles at Tanglin Halt Market. He maintained his prices at $3.50 over 5 years to serve the seniors from Tanglin Halt Estate, who form most of his clientele. Only in late 2023 did he increase prices to $4 due to rising costs over the years. It is not easy for our hawkers to earn a fair living. Our hawkers are generally mindful of the profile of the customers they serve, and they try their best to hold off any price increases. But hawkers need to be able to price their food realistically and adjust them from time to time. So I echo the anecdote that Mr. Edward Chia shared in his speech about Mr. Zuhari, who runs Project Penyak at Senja Hawker Center. The worries shared by Mr. Zuhari about the rising cost of just one ingredient, chili, as well as ingredient wastage when customers prefer just to eat a different part of the chicken, may sound quite trivial for us who wonders why there's so much fuss about just a little bit of extra sambal or picking a part of the chicken that we order. But these are cost components that have a direct impact on the hawker's earnings, which are already not high to begin with. Absorbing price increases of ingredients would effectively mean a pay cut for a hawker, on top of the already slim margins. And I'm sure many Singaporeans can empathize with this, even as price increases are not always easy to accept for anyone. There is another dimension to this, which is that hawkers inherently face limitations to how much they can sell and earn because they operate the stores themselves. Many earn less than $1 per meal that is served. But let's take, for example, just for illustration, a hawker who manages to make a $1 profit per bowl of noodle he or she sells. He or she will need to sell 200 portions of meals a day for 6 days a week in order to earn the $5,000 median income of an average Singaporean. Most do not sell as many meals or earn as much per portion of food they sell. And as Mr. Edward Chia's example has highlighted, many hawkers barely make 30 cents or 40 cents per meal that they sell. Over the years, the income of a typical hawker has remained lower than the average Singaporean and corresponds to around the second lowest income decile, which means the lowest 20% in 2022. This low income is also a point noted by Mr. Leong himself earlier in his speech. Now, like everyone, our hawkers need an income that is sustainable over time. This has implications for the sustainability of the hawker trade. Today, the median age of our hawkers is 60 years old. As our aging hawkers gradually retire, we will need new blood to sustain the hawker trade. Well, at present, fortunately, nearly all of our cooked food stores are occupied. But if hawkers cannot make a decent livelihood, the hawker trade will become much less attractive to our younger generation, who have many more career options. This is a point also noted by Mr. Louis Chua earlier. Now, another tension arises as we try to help hawkers manage their manpower costs, while we seek to preserve the local identity of our hawker culture and heritage. Our policy of only allowing Singaporeans and PRs to be storeholders at hawker centers serves to safeguard this precious aspect of our Singaporean identity. I recognize that our hawkers face the practical challenge of hiring non-locals to ease manpower constraints. But a full liberalization for foreign manpower may alter the nature of our hawker centers significantly. And so these are competing tensions, and there are unfortunately no easy solutions. Our recent moves to seek to strike a careful balance by allowing more LTVP or LTVP plus holders who have nexus and ties to Singaporean families to be store assistants would hopefully help in some way. The government fully acknowledges the impact of global inflation on the affordability of hawker food and the livelihood of hawkers. We know the difficult operating environment and challenges our hawkers face, as well as Singaporeans' desire for affordable hawker food. These are difficult tensions to balance, and there is no simple solution or easy fix. We agree with Mr. Leong that the government has a role to play in supporting our hawkers. That is what the government has been doing. For decades now, since we gathered itinerant street hawkers into our hawker centers, and through our policy sought to provide hawkers with a conducive operating environment. And we have started building hawker centers from 2011. And as we restarted building hawker centers from 2011, we set out to better address the needs of Singaporeans. In so doing, we also set out with a forward-looking mindset to test and explore new models that will allow us to safeguard hawker livelihoods and consumers' needs while keeping our hawker center landscape responsive to an evolving operating context. I'll explain more about the SEHC model later. We need to find a way as a society to keep hawker fare affordable while ensuring that hawkers can earn a fair living. Underpinning this solution must be a strong social compact that brings all stakeholders together. The government foots the cost of building hawker centers and sets policies to support our hawkers and provide them with a conducive operating environment to ensure that they are able to provide Singaporeans with affordable food at our hawker centers. The local community and private sector has a role in driving ground-up initiatives to support both hawkers and patrons, and we heard many examples earlier. Consumers can support our hawkers by patronizing them and being prepared to pay a fair price for hawkers' food to uplift the livelihoods of our hawkers. The government has implemented policies to support our hawkers by providing a conducive operating environment. We review these policies regularly to ensure that they are aligned with operating realities on the ground and for hawker centers to serve the needs of both hawkers and consumers. We recognize the cost pressures that hawkers face. In fact, according to an NEA survey, on average in 2023, cost of food ingredients accounts for nearly 60% of the operating costs. Manpower cost comes in second at 20%. Rental made up less than 10% of operating costs in hawker centers. Mr. Leong also acknowledges that rent is not a major cost component in his speech earlier. While government does not regulate hawker food prices, NEA has measures in place to provide a conducive operating environment for hawkers. Now, first, on manpower costs, we've been paying close attention to two aspects: improving access to manpower and improving hawkers' productivity. The income of hawkers is very much dependent on how many meals they can serve a day, especially during peak hours. There is only so much that one pair of hands can do. We understand hawkers' challenges in hiring store assistants. This is something we need to balance with safeguarding the local identity of our hawker culture. We do so by ensuring that being a storeholder at NEA-managed hawker centers remains reserved for Singapore citizens and permanent residents. In doing so, we also ensure low barriers to entry for Singaporeans who wish to enter the F&B business through the hawker trade. In Mr. Leong Man Wai and Mr. Louis Charles' speech earlier, they suggested allowing one work permit holder per store to work as store assistants. The suggestion is not inconceivable, actually. And there are real needs that the hawkers face in sourcing for manpower. But there are differences between hawker centers and other food establishments. Private coffee shops and F&B establishments operate like SMEs, so they are subjected to the usual quota system that MOM applies to all operating businesses here in Singapore. Our hawker centers, on the other hand, are an integral part of our cultural heritage, and they are unique and their local nature is something we want to preserve, which is why we thought very carefully about making such moves. This is why we calibrate any relaxation on restrictions on who can work at our hawker centers very carefully. As I said earlier, full liberalization of manpower in hawker centers would significantly alter the makeup and the feel of these centers. There's really no science to this question. It is really about what we're all prepared to accept as a society. Are we prepared to accept that the hawker center that we are familiar with changes in nature to something quite different? So I think this is something that will probably have to evolve over time. If members recall, in the early 2010s, there was significant concern among Singaporeans about seeing more foreigners working in hawker centers. And this very issue was raised in this House, which earlier on Mr. Edward Chia has also shared with members what was transpired in Parliament in 2010. So we need to strike a balance, as some Singaporeans may still not be able to accept seeing a significant alteration in the makeup of hawker centers. We will adjust and evolve our policies to take these views into account. Having said that, we do want to help ease some of the manpower challenges our hawkers face. This is why at Parliament last month, I had announced that starting from 1st January 2025, NEA will allow hawkers to hire long-term visit pass or LTVP plus holders with letters of consent or pre-approved LOCs to work as their store assistants at NEA-managed hawker centers and NEA-appointed operators, regardless of family ties. Now, of course, many of you will be aware that prior to this, storeholders could only appoint such LTVP or LTVP plus holders to work as their store assistants if they had a spousal relationship, and even then, on a case-by-case basis. Now hawkers can hire from an expanded pool of these potential store assistants who are already part of a Singapore family nexus. This is one example of how we continually review and adjust our policies to adjust to changing circumstances. But the reality is that each additional headcount is an added cost to our hawkers. So a more sustainable approach to manpower is to make every person more productive. Therefore, NEA has implemented measures to support hawkers in enhancing their productivity, which can help lighten the pressures of their manpower constraints. At the center level, the Productive Hawker Centres PHC program provides up to 70% tiered subsidy for centers to to adopt centralized dishwashing for up to 4 years. At the individual store level, the Hawkers Productivity Grant, the HPG, provides 80% co-funding for hawkers to purchase kitchen automation equipment and digital solutions such as queue management systems. A key business cost hawkers deal with is raw materials. Ms. Hazelpour raised a suggestion on centralized procurement to moderate such costs. This is not a new suggestion. I believe in an earlier parliamentary sitting, Mr. Alvin Yong did raise one of these suggestions in a PQ. Now, this centralized procurement idea is already present at some SEHCs, where operators have tapped on their network in the F&B and food supply sectors to offer bulk purchasing services. With such services, their storeholders have the option to secure preferential rates for raw ingredients. But from our experience, there are limitations. So far, the uptake among storeholders has not been widespread, as most already have established relationships with their existing suppliers or are quite particular about the source and quality of the ingredients. Remember what I said earlier about the unique nature of our hawker centers is that each store is run by the hawkers themselves with unique recipe, special touches. Everyone has something they want to put as special to differentiate themselves from their competitors. Nonetheless, we will continue to support such initiatives where it benefits our hawkers. Apart from manpower, the government has also implemented measures to ensure reasonable rent for hawkers and to address concerns on rent. By keeping rent affordable, we can help make the cost of doing business lower for our hawkers, even if it's not by a large percentage, because rent is less than 10% of their operating costs. Generally, store rentals at hawker centers are lower than nearby eating establishments such as coffee shops, food courts, and small eateries. For majority of cooked food storeholders in our hawker centers, the median rent is around $1,250 per month and has remained relatively stable for the past 10 years. This has been the case even while overall prices have continued to rise over the decade. This also means, therefore, that the rent is now a smaller component of their cost compared to 10 years ago. The government also extends generous subsidies to a segment of our pioneer hawkers, who make up around 30% of cooked food storeholders. For them, the rent is heavily subsidized at about $300 per month, and this can be transferred to the immediate family members of the pioneer hawkers at the same low rent. I believe Mr. Melvin Chiu, whom I spoke about earlier, is also a beneficiary of this legacy system. Let me now touch on rent at NEA hawker centers. The government builds hawker centers and does not use rent for cost recovery. Let me say that again. The government builds hawker centers and does not use the rent for cost recovery. The rents are in fact determined by what the tenderer bids for and can be as low as $1. The PSP and Mr. Louis Chua raised the issue of rent and the bidding system for store rentals. Now, our policy is for non-subsidized stores in NEA-managed hawker centers to be allocated via a tender system, in which the stores are tendered to the highest bidder who pays the bid price for the first tenancy period of 3 years. This process is open, it's transparent, and straightforward for prospective hawkers to understand. It's not a complicated system. A bidding system enables market mechanisms to work at hawker centers. The process encourages prospective hawkers that are committed and serious to come forward and submit a bid. Before doing so, prospective hawkers would have to take into account the operating realities, the business costs, and decide on what kind of food they wish to sell. They know what they bid will be what they have to pay. Once a store is open, consumers will decide. The quality and the price of the food will determine how well the store will fare and how sustainable the store will be. This market mechanism has helped to shape our current hawker center landscape. It is responsive to consumers' demands and changing expectations for hawker food, and is fair for both hawkers and consumers. Those who can offer tasty meals that consumers feel are value for money will continue to do well, while those who are priced too high and do not meet consumers' taste expectations will eventually exit. This works in tandem with other measures by the government to moderate hawker store rents which we regularly review and improve. Today, there is no reserve rent or minimum bid price. This enables bidders to obtain stores at low rental rates. In fact, over 300 stores were obtained at bids below $100 over the last 3 years. A few in 2023 and in 2024 even won bids with rents as low as $1. So it's not a myth. There are stores who are going at $1 bidded price. We saw that subletting of stores led to higher rents in the past, so we moved in 2012 to disallow such subletting. After the first tenancy period of 3 years, rental is adjusted towards the assessed market rent, or the AMR, and we recently reviewed and changed this policy to stagger the downward adjustment of tendered rent over a longer period, in fact, over 2 tenancy renewals instead of 1. This will also discourage prospective hawkers from putting in excessively high tender bids. It is not a perfect system, but collectively, our rental policies at NEA-managed hawker centers have served us reasonably well. Occupancy rates for cooked food stores have remained high, averaging above 95%. In 2023, the median successful tender price for cooked food stores was about $1,800. And about 1 in 5 cooked food stores were awarded at tender prices at or below $500. So some key numbers here. 1 in 5 awarded below $500. More than 300 stores paying less than $100 a month. Some even at $1. And in fact, 44% of bidders were actually able to secure their bids below the assessed market rent. So our system has actually kept rental prices reasonably affordable. In fact, a good number below the assessed market rent. Store demand remains healthy. In fact, vacant stores put up for tender receive an average of 7.2 bids per store and are successfully retendered within 3 to 6 months. So overall, the tender system is working. We have made recent changes and we expect to see some positive impact. We will continue to review, taking in suggestions and feedback from members and from hawkers themselves to continue improving the system. There are many views on the current price tender system model and what might be a better alternative that could replace it. Now, even the PSP itself has different views and proposed different options as well. For example, Mr. Leong Man Wai suggested one method based on percentage of gross turnover with a base rent, but this will require a point of sale system for every store in order to be able to track what the takings really are. Ms. Hazel Phua also proposed that we abandon the tender system and change it to a balloting one. She also suggested perhaps a fixed rent model as well. And as Mr. Keith Chua noted, there really won't be a perfect system. But we will keep trying. And for example, we also started to do the price quality method at our SEHC models, where rent is predetermined and stores are awarded by the operators. So we are open to trying different methods and see what works best. But let me take this chance to address some of the suggestions that Ms. Phua has raised, one of which is to abandon the tender system to a balloting one. Again, this is not a new suggestion. I remember Mr. Melvin Young asking me in a PQ before, and I think probably just about a couple of months ago. Now, let me explain that while balloting could provide an equal chance to all to obtain a store at an upfront fixed rate, what balloting could also do is to encourage frivolous applications and excess demand for stores at popular locations. This may not be fair to prospective tenderers with a genuine intent to set up a new store, because they will see their chances dwindle as more people come in and crowd into that space for a limited number of stores. And such a situation will not benefit patrons as well. Ms. Phua also suggested a fixed rent model to keep rental costs under control. But the question we must ask is, what price will we use to predetermine the rent? Let's just say we use the assessed market rent, which is professionally determined by valuers. Now then, in that case, all prospective hawkers will end up paying this price. But under today's system, as you heard me say earlier, the tendered rent for about 44% of stalls is actually below the assessed market rent, based on our 2023 data. In fact, as I said earlier, 20% pay less than 500. So this will definitely help with their business costs. So under a fixed rent model, close to about half of tenderers will see their rent much higher than it is today. Mr. Louis Chua also proposes a rental cap. And I thought it's useful for us to understand how a rental cap could distort the market dynamics. Now, if we set any cap threshold, we give the bidders the assurance that the bids will not go beyond a maximum ceiling. So that is the upside of rental cap. However, doing so could also encourage bidders to bid more competitively towards that threshold in order to outprice the competition to secure the store. So that could well mean the end of the $1 rental bid stores that we have in the system today. This could in turn lead to overall bid prices trending higher, and the whole allocation system will no longer be fair and meaningful. Even at less popular centers, the rental cap may also have an unintended consequence by inadvertently setting a price point that drives lower rentals upwards towards the cap, as I explained. Mr. Louis Chua also proposes the government take back control of all hawker centers. I thank him for his confidence in the government and the way we manage our hawker centers. And in fact, today the government already oversees all hawker centers, and we've been able to achieve reasonable rent and conducive environment for hawkers through our policies while ensuring accessible and affordable food options. The government has been responding to evolving needs, and at different time points, we have tried different management models in order to bring benefit to Singaporeans. While our systems are not perfect, we have worked in partnership with our hawkers and our operators to address these. We will continue to listen and engage and fine-tune what needs to be improved. I must also say that we should allow some space for the private sector to thrive in this space so there is a diversity of options for both hawkers and consumers. Some hawkers eventually do venture out to other F&B spaces to scale and grow. So I think we should not do it in a way that actually squeeze out the room for private sector to actually also be able to thrive in the scene. At the end of the day, we must ensure that whatever we do is transparent, easily understood by the tenderers, and will lead to better outcomes. We must make sure that the cure that we're all proposing is not going to be worse off than the issue we're trying to resolve, to the detriment of hawkers and consumers. As Mr. Leong has also noted, rent is not really the major cost factor. What hawkers need is customers' footfall and fair pricing so that they can have a decent margin and an income on the goods that they sell. Because even if the rent is free, no footfall equals to no income. So I think we have to be quite clear that rent, being a small component, is not going to be the one that will make our hawkers fare better. We continue to monitor the trends closely, as well as the attention that hawker store rent has attracted recently. Now, a small percentage of bids can be quite high, especially at popular hawker centers. For example, the recent bid at the Marine Parade Food Center that members have mentioned. Now, I must say that this outlier bid is the only one at the level of $10,000 in the last 5 years. Out of our 7,000 cooked food stores, only 4% of rent today are above the assessed market rent of $1,250. And this means that these people are still in the first tenancy term, because at the end of the third year, this 4% that is above the assessed market rent on today's policy will revert to the assessed market rent. So we have to be quite careful not to abandon a system that has actually worked quite well and benefited many hawkers just because of a small number of outliers. There may be situations where prospective tenderers put in overly high bids upfront to secure their preferred stall, expecting that their rent will be adjusted downwards to the assessed market rent after the first 3 years. Such bids may not be realistic and may distort prices over time if they proliferate. So while the numbers, as I said, are small today, other tenderers could be disadvantaged from entering the hawker trade. So we want to nip this in the bud and discourage such extraordinary high bids. I announced last week that we will implement 2 measures to encourage more realistic bidding behavior and better consider actual market conditions. First, and quite important, we will make available more information in online business cost estimation tools. We are introducing this to assist and encourage tenderers to make a more informed decision and to bid realistically when they submit a tender bid for a hawker store. We're working on the details, and we will plan to make public early next year. However, some tenderers may still choose to submit excessively high bids, and this is where our second measure comes in. We will stagger downward adjustment of tendered rent over a longer period, over 2 tenancy renewals instead of 1. Doing so serves to deter prospective hawkers from submitting unrealistic bids. After the initial 3 years, store rental will be adjusted to 50% of the difference between the bid price and the assessed market rent when tenancy is renewed. This rental rate will be in place for 3 more years before fully adjusting to the assessed market rent from the 7th year onwards. This new policy takes effect from NEA's ongoing tender exercise this month. I want to reassure existing storeholders that you will not be affected. Now, of course, we recognize this is not going to be a cure-all, and tenderers could still submit high bids if they truly assess that they have a viable business model with that bid. Nonetheless, we hope that these changes will work hand in hand to encourage prospective hawkers to bid in a more considered and realistic manner going forward. We will continue to monitor the tender bidding behaviors closely and review our tenancy policies from time to time to ensure that they continue to be relevant. I would now like to turn to the issue of operating models. But before I do so, let me once again reiterate that regardless of how we manage our hawker centers, whether it's by NEA or by operators appointed under our SEHC model, our fundamental principles remain the same. Hawkers and consumers remain at the heart of our policies. There have been many comments about the SEHC model by members today. Let me start by setting the context of why we adopted the socially conscious enterprise hawker center model. In 2011, when we restarted building hawker centers, this was with Singaporeans in mind to meet the community's rising needs for access to a variety of food options at affordable prices, especially in areas underserved with F&B options. Building hawker centers alone was not enough. We also need to set up new centers for success. This meant exploring new models and being open to different approaches that will allow us to achieve our objectives to safeguard hawker livelihoods and consumers' needs while adapting to an evolving operating context far different from when we first started building hawker centers to resettle the street hawkers. Foremost on our minds was to ensure that our new centers would be vibrant. Vibrancy is important, not just to hawkers, but to consumers as well. There was a time when residents were unhappy that hawker centers were not opening long enough to serve their dining needs. In fact, this issue was raised before and was debated in Parliament back in the year 2000s or so. In recent years, we have also received feedback from residents and the community about operating hours for hawker centers and the need to ensure they are vibrant. So in short, managing hawker centers can be a complex undertaking. Hawker centers need to be vibrant with good visitorship and footfall. They need to provide diverse food mix that responds to the evolving needs of changing demographics and be adaptable and set up with the necessary conditions to be viable and sustainable for the long term. All this will require the right business acumen to put together. Now, government agencies do not have the abilities or instincts to operate businesses. This is a context for developing the SEHC model. We assess the SEHC model to have various benefits. First, the SEHC operators possess industry knowledge and experience. They can leverage expertise in F&B and store management to ensure the vibrancy of new centers. And indeed, many have done so by developing a variety of localized programs, including initiatives tailored to the community to drive visitorship and incubation programs to provide business advice and support to aspiring hawkers. Second, SEHC operators can leverage their F&B networks to curate food mix and support storeholders to fine-tune their menu, such as through food tastings. This supports both hawkers and consumers, allowing the hawker centers to feature food that meet patrons' expectations, which in turn supports the hawkers' businesses. Third, SEHC operators can introduce new and innovative practices to support storeholders in navigating changing operating contexts and industry developments, such as onboarding onto digital and online ordering platforms. This helps our hawker centers evolve and keep up with the trends. Good curation and visitorship are important ingredients for a vibrant hawker center. These allow hawkers to thrive and earn a fair livelihood. In turn, when hawkers find it viable to operate stores for longer hours, a center can then better meet the dining needs of the residents and the community in the area. These are the objectives that had to be met, and I believe they can be met by the SEHC management model. As with any models, there will be operational issues that we need to continuously calibrate and make adjustments from time to time. We will continue to engage SEHC operators and hawkers to make necessary changes as and when needed. The SEHC model was put in place in 2011. Today, 14 out of our 121 hawker centers are managed by SEHC operators appointed by NEA. In developing this model, we sought to strike a balance between ensuring patrons' needs for hawker centers are met, including access to affordable food options and meals across the day, and hawkers' needs for a conducive operating environment to make a reasonable livelihood. The SEHC operator pays assessed market rent, but also bids for a management fee from the government to operate the center as part of the tender. So the cost of operating the SEHC is partially borne by the government. We have safeguards in place to ensure that operators do not profiteer and are expected to work closely with NEA as well as hawkers to consider the interests and needs of both hawkers and residents. In Mr. Leong Mang Wai's speech earlier, he claimed that Jurong West Hawker Centre, JW Hawker Heritage, paid $4.86 million to government to manage Jurong West Hawker Centre. I just want to clarify that this is actually incorrect. This amount is actually the management fee the government pays to JW50 Hawker Heritage to run the center, which I've earlier mentioned. So they don't pay us $4.86 million, we pay them $4.86 million. In fact, NEA pays this to JW50 over a span of 9 years. So as you can see, this is at a significant cost that is borne by government over time. As you heard from Mr. Ang Wei Neng earlier when he shared about the Jurong West Hawker Centre, the hawkers who are there pay about $1,000 plus for rental, which is quite similar to what other hawkers in NEA managed hawker centers also pay. Now, this kind of management model is also not the kind of business environment that for hawkers that you could find in many other cities. Mr. Leong gave the example of New York City. And I believe Mr. K.F. Sito will be very familiar with the kind of high rental and labor costs that are faced by hawkers, given his experience with urban hawker in New York as well. And I think members who are interested can Google Mothership. I think there are quite a few articles written about this, and I think Mr. Edward Chia has shared earlier that some hawkers that are operating in New York face high rental costs, operating costs, ingredient costs, manpower costs, and some of them have actually exited as well. So I think this is an illustration of how, through our investment in hawker centers, through our various policies, we have tried to keep costs low and manageable for hawkers here so they can continue to thrive. Now, let me talk about rent and operating costs in the SEHC model. When submitting tender proposals, prospective SEHC operators must also include their proposed store rentals and other operating costs that will be charged to storeholders. To provide stability for all storeholders upon award of the tender, operators are not allowed to vary the hawker's rent and other operating charges over the tenancy term and must keep the cost transparent. Furthermore, under NEA's staggered rent scheme, operators are required to implement lower rentals in the first 2 years of the center's operations at 80% and 90% of store rent respectively. This helps new storeholders coming into this new center manage operating costs as they build their clientele, while the center gradually establishes itself. Second, to ensure fair operating conditions for hawkers, I would like to address some of the specific concerns raised by Mr. Leong about tenancy agreements. Now, such conditions are part of the tenancy agreements between the SEHC operators and the storeholders. The operators put in place the necessary conditions to account for the needs of the community. For example, operating hours specify that storeholders must open their stores for a specific number of days and hours. This serves to ensure that the centers would be vibrant and have sufficient stores in operation to serve meals for residents throughout the day. Nevertheless, conditions are also in place to take care of the well-being of our hawkers. NEA provided guidelines on the terms of such tenancy agreements, including on termination clauses, liquidated damages clauses, and operating hours. For instance, on operating hours, storeholders are not required to work more than 5 days a week or 8 hours a day. These are guidelines that operators need to comply with before using their tenancy agreements with storeholders. Operators are also required to explain the tenancy agreement to storeholders in simple terms for the storeholders' understanding before they signed it. Now, once again, there is a fine balance needed to look after the interests of both hawkers and our community for whom hawker centers are built for. Third, to ensure that operators serve the hawkers and the community in accordance with SEHC's agreement with NEA, operator must plow back at least 50% of any surpluses into programs that benefit the hawker centers and or their storeholders. Now you can imagine that storeholders, the SEHC operators may generate operating surpluses in some years and incur losses in some other years. But when surpluses are available, operators have run initiatives to raise footfall and business levels to benefit storeholders, such as providing shuttle bus services at Yishun Park Hawker Centre and organizing festive events at Bukit Canberra Hawker Centre. Some operators have also tapped on their surpluses to help the storeholders reduce their operating costs, such as for cleaning. Also, SEHC operators, as part of their tender proposals, must propose ways to ensure affordable food options are available. It is for the SEHC operators to propose and set a price. It's not for NEA to dictate what is reasonable price. So this is some flexibility will accord them, and they will take market conditions into account when they put up the proposal. So far, operators have committed that all stores in their centers will provide at least one value meal option. Now, this is not an attempt to force hawkers to sell all of their dishes at low prices. Instead, the intent is for the operators to work with hawkers to offer a range of food offerings at different price points. This provides more choices for patrons if they want or need it, and is especially intended to support those with lower income. However, value meals only account for around 5% to 20% of meals sold in SEHCs. So it is actually not the bulk of the revenue source for hawkers at SEHCs. Hawkers therefore still retain flexibility to offer other food items and sell them at appropriate prices so that they can continue to earn an overall fair living. Hawkers are not expected to make a loss selling value meals. The SEHC operators can propose to revise the price of such value meal options, which NEA will review based on the market situation and the storeholder's ability to make a fair livelihood. This has in fact been done before at Si Yuan Hawker Centre, where the price has been reviewed and adjusted based on feedback from operators and hawkers. NEA remains open to consider other suggestions that operators may propose based on their viability and feasibility to ensure that sufficient affordable options are provided at the SEHCs. Operators must also engage hawkers through regular hawker feedback group sessions. These are held at least once every quarter, where operators gather feedback and ideas from their storeholders to improve the hawker centers and the hawkers' livelihoods. NEA has worked closely with hawkers and operators, as well as other stakeholders, to refine the SEHC model over the years, and we will continue to listen to concerns and input to evolve and improve the model as we go along. So with our efforts over the years, the SEHC model is generally working well. Our SEHCs have brought overall benefits to hawkers and patrons alike, and are well established within their communities. The SEHC operators have curated food stalls in their SEHCs to ensure good quality and variety, and kept their centers open for all 3 meals to meet patrons' dining needs. average occupancy at SGHCs remains high, with low store turnover comparable to NEA-managed hawker centers. While the comparison and termination numbers at SGHCs are as compared to NEA hawker centers cited by Mr. Leong are factual, you said something about 8% versus 3%, they do need to be put into context. The average annual termination rates cited for SGHCs, which is 8% cited by Mr. Leong, also accounted for new SGHCs that have just opened and are starting out. So during this period, new centers tend to have some attrition, and this is a natural part of business volatility. When businesses at new SGHCs move into a steady state, store terminations tend to stabilize and, in fact, are no different compared to NEA hawker centers. There continues to be high interest, in fact, in applying for stalls at SGHCs, such as those recently opened at Anchorvale, Buangkok, and Woodley. Based on NEA's recent surveys, over 97% of patrons and stallholders were overall satisfied with SEHCs, which is comparable to the satisfaction level at NEA-managed centers. Also, the SEHCs have performed better in cleanliness, center management, and placemaking activities. Operating costs for stallholders at SEHCs, including rentals, remain manageable. The median store rent at SEHCs is comparable to non-subsidized stalls at similar NEA-managed hawker centers. When comparing rental, it should not just be based on absolute rental, but one should also consider aspects such as the store size and the amenities in the center. Nonetheless, we do not take all this for granted. We also recognize that some operators have done better, while others have faced implementation challenges along the way, and especially when they first get started. This is also why we renew the management of SEHCs via an open tender after the incumbent operator's final tenancy term. It is a transparent process that allows incumbents that have done well to be considered favorably, while weeding out poorer performing operators if necessary. Such a system ensures healthy competition between the SGHC operators and motivates them to refine and improve their management models over time. As we roll out the SGHC model to more new hawker centers, we will continue to monitor the implementation of the SGHC model closely and work with hawkers and operators to ensure that our new hawker centers continue to serve the interests of patrons well and ensure the well-being of our hawkers. Next, I will address the concerns raised about the affordability of food at hawker centers. Today, our hawker centers across our island continue to provide most affordable cooked food options for Singaporeans. That's why we often receive requests from residents to have a hawker center in their neighborhoods, even when it is already well served by other F&B outlets. As MPs on the ground, we often get such requests. Our key focus, therefore, must be to ensure a sufficient supply of hawker stalls to cater to residents of all regions. We are committed to doing so, and we will continue maintaining our existing hawker centers as we build new ones. 14 new centers are currently in operation, and the locations of the other 6 centers have been announced. The government does not directly regulate or control food prices across the board. Doing so would also distort the true cost of hawker food, which would in turn depress our hawkers' earnings. This will result in an unsustainable hawker trade, discourage new hawkers from joining the trade, and will eventually affect everyone if affordable hawker food becomes less available. It is not prudent in the long run, and hawkers would bear the brunt while also experiencing the same cost of living pressures just like everyone else. We have to be careful about over-regulating across the board. And broadly speaking, market competition is an important self-regulating force for hawker food prices. We have been talking about affordable food, but affordable might not necessarily equate to cheap. There are actually 2 different things. As I mentioned earlier in my speech, hawkers consider various factors when pricing their food, including operating costs and the need to remain competitive with other stores. I have spoken to hawkers, a young hawker, one of them, Darren, who shared that many of them practice what he would say is honest pricing. in which they price their food to reflect the true cost and quality of ingredients and apply a reasonable but modest profit margin to sustain their livelihood. Hawkers know that consumers are discerning and they need to be honest with their pricing. In allowing the market to function, another hawker, Mr. Norman from Nasi Lemak Ayam Taliwang, I think he's up there as well, he said, and I quote, "We can let our hawkers and their customers find the right balance of where the price point for hawker food should be," unquote. And over time, this enables a sustainable hawker center landscape that is responsive to both hawkers and consumers' needs. To help Singaporeans cope with cost of living concerns, you heard from SPS Sean Huang earlier that government has introduced broad-based measures, such as providing Community Development Council CDC vouchers under the Enhanced Assurance Package. And as you heard, these vouchers can be used at participating hawker stores to help both the household and the hawkers. Now, thus far, around $650 million of CDC vouchers that has been disbursed have been used at participating heartland shops, including stores across all hawker centers. So I'm heartened to hear from Mr. Edward Chia's speech that hawkers at Senja Hawker Center shared that these CDC vouchers have contributed directly to their revenue and brought in new customers for their businesses. The government is looking at more ways that we can support Singaporeans and hawkers and will announce more details when ready. I'm also heartened that many businesses and community groups are also stepping up and doing their part to help Singaporeans and hawkers. Various MPs also shared their local initiatives, but I will just share maybe a couple more. In 2023, the Marine Parade Citizens Consultative Committee, the Marine Parade Merchants Association, and Katong Juchet Business Association worked together with some hawkers in 3 hawker centers and coffee shops to launch a value meal at Marine Parade initiative for patrons. In September 2024, the Marine Parade constituency also launched the Marine Parade Family Vouchers for eligible families to use at its neighborhood merchants, markets, and hawker centers. So these are measures that ground up activities that also goes to help both those in need and the hawkers themselves, meaningful ones. The private sector has also introduced similar initiatives, and you heard from Mr. Chia earlier, examples such as DBS's ongoing Support Our Heartlands initiative and the earlier 5 million hawker meals scheme that was shared. So I'm deeply encouraged by these initiatives, which support our hawkers and the broader community, and I hope to see many more of them as we continue to uplift and safeguard our hawker culture. I agree with Mr. Leong that to safeguard our hawker trade for future generations, one of our key priorities is to nurture a new generation of young hawkers to take over the reins. To attract more Singaporeans to join the hawker trade, we need to first ensure that hawkers are able to earn a fair living, work in a clean and comfortable environment, and receive the support that they require. This underpins our policies, as I've mentioned earlier. NEA has been working closely with hawkers and stakeholders to attract new hawker entrants and equip them with skill sets to boost their chances of success. This includes 3 key programs that NEA runs to help aspiring hawkers to kickstart their businesses: the Incubation Store Program, ISP, Hawkers Development Program, HDP, and the Hawkers Succession Scheme. Mr. Leong and Mr. Louis Chua proposed setting up a hawker academy to be a focal point for training young aspiring hawkers in Singapore. In fact, we already have a similar academy in place. Under our current Hawkers Development Program, the HDP, NEA and SSG appoints the Asian Culinary Institute, the ACI, under Nanyang Polytechnic to provide training to aspiring hawkers and equip them with the necessary skills for their businesses, such as business strategy and business pricing. So that concept is already in action today. We are encouraged to see aspiring hawkers enter the trade through these means, with some choosing to preserve traditional recipes, while others infuse new, creative, and innovative ideas to modernize hawker fare. This diversity contributes to the richness and depth of our evolving hawker culture. Now, furthermore, SCHC operators also run various incubation programs to support their stallholders to ease into the hawker trade. After all, it is in their interest to make sure that the hawkers succeed in their centers. For example, Fei Xiong Social Enterprise Private Limited introduced the Entrepreneurship Program at Woodley Village Hawker Centre. The program provides mentorship and support for young hawkerpreneurs in areas such as culinary skills, store setup, menu creation, and marketing activities. Fei Xiong also provided financial assistance, such as purchasing cooking equipment at interest-free installments. Collectively, the programs by NEA and SEHC operators have helped to inject younger entrants into the hawker scene. To date, over 70 hawkers have joined the trade through these programs with a median age of 37. We will continue to review the program outcomes and identify other areas to better encourage and support aspiring hawkers to enter and stay in the hawker trade. We will provide more details next year. Mr. Leong proposed that hawker center management be taken over by a new government agency to be called Hawker Singapore. Again, I thank him for putting his trust in government to manage our hawker centers well. But in fact, I would say that we already have a dedicated division now in NEA called the Hawker Centers Group, looking after this with place managers on the ground that interacts closely with our hawkers. Therefore, what he's proposing is essentially a reorganization of an existing dedicated team that is already functioning. But what is more important is that whatever entity that oversees the management of hawker centers should be plugged in to the day-to-day concerns of individual centers and be responsive to its evolving needs. This is what our place managers does on a day-to-day basis, and our SEAC operators are also able to do this too. NEA works closely with hawkers as well as industry associations like the Federation of Merchant Associations of Singapore, and we assign place managers to each hawker center so that the nexus is tight. I turn back now to the motion that is being debated today. So external circumstances such as inflation have presented challenges for hawkers and Singaporeans alike, especially in recent years. We deeply understand these sentiments. For hawkers, increases in operating costs, especially for ingredients, can mean having to absorb some of these costs or making the difficult decision to raise prices for customers. For Singaporeans, having to pay 50 cents or $1 more for hawker meals could feel like a dent in their wallets, as prices of other daily essentials also add up. As the government and with the support of our local community and the private sector, we are doing what we can to mitigate the impact of these rising costs. As many members have spoken about, I want to thank members who have acknowledged the practical realities we operate in and for reaffirming the government's efforts to do right by our hawkers. At the heart of the debate today is how we can sustain and grow our invaluable hawker culture so that it continues to thrive. This is something that the government is fully committed to do. But we must recognize that there are often competing objectives, and as consumers, we can all play an important role in this too. Many Singaporeans are worried about the impact of global inflationary pressures on the cost of living, and understandably so. However, for hawkers to earn a fair living, they need to price food realistically. While price increases are not always easy to accept, we must remember how much a hawker can sell a bowl of rice or noodles for is dependent on how much Singaporeans are prepared to pay. Ultimately, hawkers need the support of consumers. We must form a strong social compact to ensure that our hawker culture can continue to thrive and Singaporeans can continue to enjoy hawker fare for many more generations to come. Mr. Speaker, allow me to conclude. We all want our hawker centers and hawker culture to continue to thrive, but it entails a fine balancing act. Overall, the government has taken a calibrated and long-term view in crafting our policies. We have put in place comprehensive measures that strike a careful balance between ensuring affordable hawker food options and supporting hawkers with a conducive business environment, while also safeguarding the long-term sustainability of the hawker trade, local hawker culture, and heritage. This would not have been possible without the readiness and commitment from our hawkers and hawker associations to work with the government. I thank them for their input and their partnership, which have helped us improve our policies to balance between competing objectives and chart the best way forward for both hawkers and Singaporeans. We may not always get this right the first time. With your inputs and feedback, and as circumstances change, we will review and adjust our policies. We have done so in the past, and we will continue to fine-tune and improve. What's important in all of these adjustments is that our hawkers must be able to earn a fair livelihood. This is critical for our hawker culture to thrive for a long time. Without our hawkers as torchbearers, our hawker centers will be empty and our hawker culture will disappear. And this is why I support the proposed amendment from Mr. Edward Chia. I invite members to join me in expressing support as well, because Mr. Chia is right that the government should continue its support for hawkers and hawker culture so that Singaporeans can continue to enjoy good and affordable hawker food while ensuring hawkers can earn a fair livelihood. 2025 will be our 60th year as an independent country. It will also mark the 5th anniversary since the UNESCO inscription for hawker culture in Singapore. Hawkers have always played an integral role in building our country, and hawker culture has been an important part of our national Singaporean identity. As I had announced last week at the Singapore Hawker Seminar and Awards, in conjunction with these milestones, the government will be reviewing measures to further support hawkers and revitalize our hawker culture. We will announce more details during the Committee of Supply debates next year. To members of this House and to all Singaporeans, I want to assure you that safeguarding our hawker culture remains an important priority for this government. We are committed to work together with our hawker community and our stakeholders to do so. Together, we can sustain our hawker culture to thrive for generations to come. Sir, would you allow me to speak in Mandarin now? Mr. Speaker, sir, I stand in support of the motion as amended by Mr. Edward Chia.